Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tamika Williams, and I'm a prosecutor with the Orange County District Attorney's Office. I supervise the Mental Health Recidivism Reduction Unit. So when you think about alternatives to incarceration, collaborative court, where we work together, DUI court, young adult court, that's the unit that I supervise, as well as those that have mental illness and the intersection with that and the criminal justice system. Prior to that, I was a human trafficking prosecutor, and I think that's kind of what brings me here. And I'm a mom. I have a daughter, Junior, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ezequiel, or Ezequiel, depends what you prefer. And I'm the executive director of PIET, which is an NGO with expertise in helping victims of human trafficking. We have residential care facilities, teams of detection in different regions of the country. We have also international cooperation programs in Nepal, North India, and Ivory Coast. And I also lead a law office that has an expertise also in helping victims of human trafficking. My background is that I studied law, and then I did my expertise to be a private prosecutor and expertise in human rights. When I started to do this job of helping associations and being in the office and all that, I understood the importance of policy, so I did a postgrad in compliance. And then when we go ahead through all that, and because of the theme that we're talking here, I did also a master in big data and business intelligence, and then an executive MBA, and all that to have a holistic approach in favor of victims of human trafficking, which is the main goal and the target that we have as an NGO, providing life opportunities and a new beginning to those that are living in a real hell, actually, and to provide them a good opportunity, and that ends with the end of vulnerability and good and dignified job positions.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Madeline Rodriguez. I am so grateful to serve with Project Kinship as a director of programs. I say that it is my role to actualize the mission of Project Kinship, which is to provide support and training to lives impacted by incarceration, gangs, and violence through hope, healing, and transformation. We truly envision a world where hope lives and the cycle of despair ends. Every day, literally 7 days a week, 24 hours, 7 days a week, we have teams located at the Intake Release Center and Theo Lacey facility receiving community members back home. We have over 35 different high schools, junior highs throughout Orange County that we serve doing restorative practices. And then we're involved heavily in juvenile and adult reentry services. So this subject matter being here is really important to us, and we talk about taking care of the community. It takes a village, and it takes all of us working together, so it's an honor to be here with you all.
Hello, my name is Arthur Scott. I'm the program director for the J3 Reading Foundation and 20 schools in Compton and Watts. We target fourth graders to read at a regular level. I'm also a member of the Black Faith Coalition Against Human Trafficking in Southern California, human trafficking. I've been involved in gang activities as far as with gangs in my earlier stage. I guess the best compliment I got was from an OG. I guess he was not trying to be nice when we try to get involved with people's lives. He called me a troublemaker. And I said, yeah, I am, because we're going to stop as much ugliness as possible. So that's me.
So I want all of you out there to think of questions, because as you see, what an esteemed panelist or panel that we have here. And the thing, when I look at how do we keep our kids safe online, well, how do we keep our kids safe, period? And especially the kids that don't have the support. And we know, because what you all have been experiencing the last 2 days is, I think it was Maddie's point, it takes a village. It takes our medical professionals, our educators. We have so many educators that are here. I know that from even our Department of Education, our law enforcement, our nonprofits, our NGOs, our faith-based. So I'm going to start with a question. I'm going to bookend it because I actually know Miss Tamika as well as Arthur both have deep experiences in the educational system. I know Ms. Tamika really well from our work as lawyers and our work together in collaborative treatment courts, but she didn't share with you, she was also a teacher in her life before being a lawyer. And I think when I look to both of you, there are going to be kids that don't fall within the programs that we talk about, all of these wonderful resources that we talk about. And what we want to see is prevention, of course. Upstream is where Dr. Sandy and I have been talking about for a decade or more, is getting upstream instead of being so reactive. What are your ideas as educators to keep our kids safe preventatively, so from a teacher's point of view, but from not penetrating the justice system? Let me go down to the end of the table. Arthur.
Okay, thinking about that, one of the things I remember, because I come from a production background first, I started teaching really because in between different TV shows you have hiatus. And so I said, well, I want to get a part-time job in between, right? So I started teaching in Inglewood, 2 months out of the year, whatever. And of course, you become a mandated reporter when you do that. And then I left the industry and started doing that more full-time. But as a mandated reporter and so forth, you have to be intrusive, you have to look. And one of the number one things I remember was that there was a time in which I did Head Start, which is beautiful. Head Start is child care for low-income families. They're working at grocery stores, whatever. And one of the things, of course, that you have to get used to is the fact that from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., the kids come. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, 6:05, you got a man or woman getting ready to go to work, and you have to check their kid in front of them. You got to check for bruises. You have to check their arms. You have to check for places where kids get hit, okay? And so when I did the little kids, you realize it also about the larger kids too. How intrusive are you going to be when it comes to seeing whether or not a kid's in trouble, whether or not a young person is struggling, whether or not you're seeing the signs of them not being well groomed or sleeping a lot, or whether they're walking around a lot of bling on them and so forth. And so I always think about when it comes to education thing, how intrusive are you going to be? Because it is about being invasive. It is about caring. It is about that village aspect. Because there are kids out there that are falling through, and you're there to help them. And there's no nice, easy way of being intrusive in someone's life except believing that's necessary.
Thank you, Arthur. And Ms. Tamika, we just finished watching The Investigator give us scary information about, what happens online and some of these applications, and great when there's a parent who's present. But what are your ideas, either in your former life as a teacher or as a prosecutor, so that they're not penetrating your system?
I'll speak to both of those. So when I became a prosecutor with the human trafficking unit, I didn't know much about it. And I think a lot of people, I think I was like a lot of people who thought it just happened in the alleyways or, and I had a training the second day of becoming a prosecutor. And there was a survivor there. Her name is Ori Freeman. I'll never forget her. And she spoke about being 12 years old. She spoke about being a victim early on, sexual abuse, and no one spoke of it. No one asked her, how are you? No one asked her, what do you think? And so she traveled with a friend, and they met up at a house, and there was a man there. And within the first 20 minutes, she reflects on that moment when he knew he had her. He listened, he asked her questions. It was simple as that. And then when she said, no one's ever asked me anything, she said, that's when I saw his face change. And he knew he had her at that moment, and he knew from then on, he could use that psychological warfare whenever she tried to get out of him being her trafficker, that no one cares about you, no one listens. So when I talk about being a teacher, I was 22. I was doing Teach for America. I was placed in Compton, with 7th and 8th graders. They were like, Miss Westfield, we got boyfriends older than you. It was one of those. And I didn't know much, but I knew to, let's start a girls' club. Let's do this, let's do that, let's talk. And I had no idea. There was one young woman named Sylvia, and I was her godmother and her quinceañera. And then 20 years later, I ran into her on the streets in Hollywood, going to see Wicked. And we hugged, and we went to dinner. And on another night, she passed to me a folded old paper. I opened it, It was a flyer I had written, 1993. And it was a girls' club inauguration. And we did things like, brought girls together and we'd go do community service. And she said, and you flip it over, and you can see that she was brainstorming ideas for her gang moniker. And she said, whenever I thought about going the wrong way or letting life take me the other way, I held on to this. And I say that, a lot of people don't know the impact that you have as an educator, as a community member, as, a law enforcement officer. That moment, no matter how overwhelming we are as teachers, as community members, take a moment, maybe 5 minutes during lunch break or break. How are you doing? What's going on with you? Let's talk. I want to know what you think. That is power in fighting against these predators. And I just wanted to share that from both perspectives.
So let me turn to Ms. Maddie and Mr. Ezequiel. Your passion and the work that you do in the communities, speaks volumes and resonates with everyone in this room. And again, we talk about, of course, we want to get upstream on the preventative measures, and we talked a lot about that through the last 2 days, and that's a lot of resource demands, and sometimes, as well-intended as we are, we're left reactionary. And I'm not saying that the work that you do is reactionary, but you are embracing those, sadly, sometimes who have already gone down the path. You with your NGO, Ezequiel, and the work at PK. Can the two of you speak to what else can we do? Again, we have our kids who are so vulnerable. They're not fitting into some of these square-pegged programs or things that are being created. How are we protecting our kids? What is a way to do that from the tremendous work that each of you do? So, Ms. Maddie, let me turn to you first.
So I'll touch on 3 quick points that came to mind as we were talking and as the both of you were sharing. There was an American psychologist by the name of Dr. Harlow. He did a research study with some rhesus monkeys a while back. And then the premise of the study was to see if these 2 infant monkeys would pick either 1, a wire cage with nourishment and milk, or 2, a wire cage with a cloth covering. How many of you, by show of hands, think that those monkeys picked the milk? Okay, a few. How many of you think that the monkeys picked the cloth with the wire? Every time the monkeys picked the cloth wire over nourishment. So that's 1 point. Number 2, the other thing that comes to mind is we have a great mentor by the name of Reginald Washington out in San Diego. He leads an organization called Project Aware. And he shared on this premise of the importance of asking, how do you feel? He said, as a 16-year-old facing a life sentence as a juvenile in an adult facility at that time, he was in his 4x4 and asking the question, why am I still here with all this rage and anger? And realized no adult in his life had ever asked him how he felt. And by the age of 6, 7, he had already seen a tumultuous life and didn't understand how to express the emotions that he was experiencing, but he did understand violence. And then number 3, how many of you like pineapples? Oh, great. And if you don't like pineapples by the end of this story, I hope you will. So quick story. At my earliest recollection was being the age of 4, walking to a door in my own household, as I heard screams coming out of my parents' room. I opened the door to find my father on top of my mother with his fist in her face, and looked at me and said, "You better get out of here or you're next." Just a small glimpse of some of my earliest memories of domestic violence, substance use, child abuse that happened in my own home. My grandma Piña, which also means pineapple, was the one safe adult in my life that consistently always asked me how I felt and made me feel safe. It still wasn't until the age of 13 that I mustered the courage to call 911 in my own home, because I knew that I had to say something to protect my younger sibling. Not even for myself. But there's such stigma for individuals to have courage to say what's going on. So it starts with this framework understanding that we have to create language, social emotional literacy for children, youth, adults, to have the courage to express how we genuinely feel and create safe spaces together. So I wouldn't even say it's a specific tool. There are great specific tools we can engage in, but it starts with that simple I see you. I'm here to sit with you, and how are you feeling? And let's create that space together.
Well, I'm 100% aligned with you. Something that we work with teams is to ensure that we do victim-centered work. From the moment that we do the detection work, which is finding out probable victims of human trafficking in apartments, clubs, in streets, and contexts of prostitution, it's always the decision of the woman to get out of that context. We are not the heroes, they are. And all this starts when we first hear the first step of empowerment is to hear somebody that normally is told to be shut down. And I think it's very important to make the people that we attend, the women that we attend, the children that we work for, that we care and that they are at the center of every single process. And sometimes it's not difficult because the law enforcement wants to prosecute and do the investigation. The public prosecutor is in a hurry because of the time, the deadlines. I understand that the judge wants to solve the case, but what about the victim? And what about the process that she's going through? The re-victimization that she lives every single time she has to tell her story. So a single moment of just hearing sometimes is everything. The single moment of where she can see that we are not pushing her into the process, or we're not pushing her into going ahead with passing what we call the emergency phase into a restoring process, which is, I agree with what you said. The first thing that a victim needs is a safety environment. She's not looking for justice, not even vengeance. And do you know what? We made a study inside of Fiat. We had 10,000 women. And almost of them, in a huge number, didn't say, I want to denounce or make a statement because they wanted vengeance. They said, because I don't want this to happen to any woman.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we've learned a lot over the last couple of days about the presence digitally, and Kendra's session on algorithms and targeting. And what I hear from all of you, that I just broke something, sorry, is safety, being able to disrupt cycles. This is how we're going to help keep our kids safe. So let me turn it over to, and I'm not picking on any of the four of you, but who would like to address them? How do we make it safe for our child? Where is the safe place or the person that you as members and all of us as members can accomplish and pass on and educate? Anybody want to take a stab at that one?
Well, I'll go first. I heard a phrase a couple weeks ago by a lady that does really great work in human trafficking. She's one of those people that goes out in Figueroa at 10 o'clock at night and talks to women and stand there in the background and make sure everything's okay. And she says, one thing I remember about kids, they will always run toward the love. So if you're not going to sit there and show them the love, if you're not going to sit there and let them know that, even if you answer the question with, well, I don't know what to do. Well, I don't know what to do either, but we're going to find it out together, okay? So remember, the kids always run toward the love. They want to be comforted. They want someone safe. You can be that person. You have to be that person. You have to go into the abyss. And it's hard, and you don't have all the answers. But guess what? If you don't have the answers, there's someone out there that's going to have it, and it'll take it the wrong way. So always remember, the point is that you've got to be a firewall. We have to start creating our own firewalls. Our firewalls outside of online, our firewalls, on an everyday basis, everything in schools, whatever. Create firewalls with your family and friends and everyone like that. I know it's hard, okay? I call it, the phrase is like, I had it written down here, sorry. I think it was called, I'll call it later. Anyway, it's called cruelty, protective cruelty, okay? You know you have a daughter, you have a sister or a cousin or whatever, got a new boyfriend or whatever. You gotta watch this guy. You don't know. I mean, he could be the greatest guy in the world, but the first time you meet people in the lives of your cousins, loved ones, whatever, you gotta have your spidey sense going. You gotta understand what's out there. You have to constantly say, well, you know what? I don't know anything about him yet, okay? I gotta find out. The only way to do that is to be invasive, sit there and ask questions, to watch constantly. How does your niece's 16-year-old boyfriend interact with her 12-year-old sister? It's a pain in the neck. I know it probably feels bad, but that's the way it has to be, okay, in this day and age. You live in probably the most domestically violent nation that the world has ever seen. From what happened to Native Americans, slavery, going into this. You must be aware of the world you live in. You must be aware of it 24 hours a day, every day.
I love Arthur spidey senses. Y'all have spidey sense out there? Everybody's got spidey senses. So that's going to be something we need to take away so that we can learn to protect our kids. I heard something though, and I've heard it from a couple, and especially I think Mr. Ezequiel explained this. How do we keep from re-traumatizing our survivors, our victims in the system? And Tamika and I sit obviously in that criminal justice system. And how do we then, again, keep them safe? Because this is a journey. This is not a flip the switch and everybody's going to be good in one day. Tamika, what are we going to do from our justice system, our law enforcement point of view?
Well, sorry, I talked about. I don't profess to be an expert on how not to re-traumatize people. All I can say is when I meet with a victim, and Judge Hernandez is very humble, but she started Grace Court. Grace Court, when she realized, so for a long time, as a prosecutor, we treated women, as you all know, as criminals. And the law paradigm shifts so that we stop treating our juveniles, they're no longer eligible to be charged with prostitution, but it also changed to our adults. The law shifted so that we could actually prosecute the traffickers pretty severely. There's a lot of issues on the Johns. They are not being prosecuted. But she started Grace Court so that prosecutors could sit with the victims and they could develop a relationship with the prosecutors. I have a job to do, but the victims in Grace Court could hear that they had a whole team at this table for them. And so as a prosecutor, I wouldn't continue to ask the question. I wouldn't, she's protective, or he is protective of their trafficker. I didn't continue to ask her to tell her story. I just, how are you doing today? What's going on? What do you like? And that opportunity through Grace Court gave me as an opportunity as a prosecutor to develop a relationship that was non-confrontational and non-invasive, and that provide support through victim witness and waymakers and all of that. So, but we would show up on day one with these victims and let them know who we are.
So let me bump over then to Ezequiel and to Miss Maddie again. You know, Dr. Morgan started the event off talking about, gosh, crosswalks. And when we're little, we have somebody to hold our hand, right? When we're in a crosswalk. Often, the individuals that both you and Ezequiel serve have already been injured. But how do we continue to hold their hands until we can completely have them realize we're here to help and that they can trust? That doesn't happen immediately, right? So what do we all do to make sure we have a crosswalk in place for our young people? And when I say young people, I'm talking not just our kids, our youth, our under 18, our young people. Let's speak more, on the larger scale to emerging adults and even old people like me. But let's center on the young group. What do you have to say? How can we help there?
Well, in our experience, damaged people don't trust nobody. They've been cheated, damaged, so you need to build a bond. And that bond is a sacred bond that needs to be cared of. So one of the things that I agree with what was previously said don't make statements that you cannot accomplish. Words like, everything is going to be great, do this statement, you need to do that. No, we are somebody that is walking in the way, going with that person for an important part of that life or a restoration process. And on the other hand, I think that bond is a process. It's not something that immediately appears. So, for example, in the residential care facilities that we have, is a process, and the way we share information about the rules, how the house works, and how the process goes on, is step by step. So it's like a little walk. It's not an event, it's a process. So I think being true in what we can accomplish is so important. And on the other hand, sometimes, this is an example, some women come out of they graduate from what we call graduation. We do an event, a celebration of when the woman finishes the program and starts the job. We continue there when she needs it. But sometimes they need psychological therapy for a long while, and we are there for them. So if I can say something about that, is being there step by step, and that they are at the center of every single decision. And secondly, don't say something that you cannot accomplish.
Thank you. Ms. Madeline.
And just adding to that, it takes one adverse childhood experience to put a child at risk. It also takes just one safe, consistent adult in someone's life. Again, Bina, my grandma Bina was that one safe adult for me and mine. So when we work with our youth and even just the community, we start every meeting, we start every check-in with the one-word check-in, even with our staff and every circle that we do together, to kind of honor this practice of being with. The restorative practice lens talks about the importance of not being permissive, not being punitive, but restoration happens when we are walking with, when we are journeying with. So I'm giving you high support. I'm also giving high accountability for both you and myself. And restorative practices focuses on this premise of restoring the self as well as restoring the community. We are restoring harm, repairing harm that has happened, taking responsibility, and learning the language individually so that I can take ownership of my feelings and what my feelings and how my interactions impacted someone else, and for us to come together and build together. But it's that consistency, it's the showing up, it's the standing in front of the school, and even though someone's 20 minutes late, it's like, I'm really grateful. It makes me so happy to see you here on campus today. It starts with building those relationships, and that trust will be built with that. And it's then that we get to those other difficult conversations where we can do the work.
Yeah, truly a cross-sectionality. And I hope what you're hearing up here is the voices of so many different organizations, and organizations that you're all a part of. And that means community. Community is how we keep our children safe. And I'm going to go back down to the end of the table with you, Arthur, and I think I'm going to take away, we're all empowered with a spidey sense. Even if we don't have the program per se that child fits into at this point to keep that child safe with a safety plan in place, what have you. As a teacher and educator in your foundation, I keep hearing too how important having the youth voice, or the voice, that victim-centered voice at the table. How is that best implemented in the work that you're doing? Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, we also use restorative practices at J3. We do some social emotional learning also to reach the kids. And as he said here, the greatest thing, of course, is how much you're going to listen. How much you're going to talk, but really it is how much you're going to listen to someone. How much you're going to listen to a kid that needs help, okay? You'll let them get out their feelings, you'll listen to everything they say. You're going to sit there and listen 50% of the time or 80% of the time. So with that part now, we don't know, of course, with fourth graders and stuff like that, just how many of them are being exploited. Probably not sexually trafficked, but of course might be being abused at home and so forth. But it's ridiculous to think that a fourth grader isn't being trafficked, okay? So we have to be aware of all those things. But restorative practices is a very good way to sit there and work on your listening skills when it comes to approaching a young child or anyone at any age, okay? I always believe that, you know, as far as your own children are concerned and loved ones and family and stuff like that with kids growing up, look, how you relate to a 6-year-old is how that 16-year-old is going to talk to you, okay? I'm one of those people that believes that, you know, parenting, of course, is all the rest of your life, you know. A child isn't an adult at 18. No, I don't believe that at all. You know, from 0 to 25 is when you're seeing whether or not you're going to raise a well-rounded individual and so forth. It never ends. How you talk to your 16-year-old is the way you talk to them when they're 25, 30, and it keeps going on and on. But again, listening is the greatest asset you have when it comes to understanding.
Ms. Tamika, going back to the work that you do and the outreach, because I know it's outside of the courtroom. You are just not a prosecutor inside the courtroom, and there are so many different, again, organizations here that are supportive. We heard earlier again from Ms. Kendra that, you know, what about when you don't have the parent who is involved, and maybe you as a parent or a prosecutor, a teacher, a facilitator, how can you help be involved to oversee with spidey senses? Are there ideas that you can share with everyone in some of the work that you've done?
Sure. So the most vulnerable children, as we all know, are the ones whose parents aren't necessarily involved. Doesn't mean that parents who are involved, those children aren't vulnerable as well. Online predators are online predators. But I'm a big proponent. You know, I laugh. I'm like, I survived teaching sex ed in the 90s, okay, to 7th and 8th graders. But I didn't mince my word. You know, I didn't dumb it down for them. I did protect them from the reality. So when we talk about how do we help children who don't have that support at home, bring it to the source. I spent a lot of time going to schools, talking directly to the children, showing them case studies, showing them the text messages of how these predators recruit and engage in psychological warfare on you so that they have you. And their eyes were wide, and these are high schoolers. Their eyes were wide, their mouths wide open as we went through the text messages, as we talked about the online apps and all of that. So I didn't have that knowledge. I mean, I wasn't an expert in it. I brought my investigator. And today, Investigator Dent, the Orange County Sheriff's Department, on a dime's notice, came out and put on a presentation. So when I say, how can you show up for these children who don't have support? You call your local law enforcement. You talk to your principal. You're a community-based organization. You say, we'd like to start going into the schools with law enforcement. And I'm not talking about high school. These kids are being recruited. At the time that I was doing it, the average age of turning a girl out was 11 and 9 for boys. So we have to get real with having these real conversations with kids at younger and younger ages. So I'm a proponent of even earlier than middle school, but at a minimum middle school, and you bring the education, unadulterated, unfiltered education to these kids. Because if they don't, like someone said on the panel, they don't get it from you who cares and who supports in a loving environment, it'll be used against them and they'll get it from somebody else. So that's how you show up, through education directly to the source. I was a big brother, big sister in Los Angeles. You can show up like that. You can show up by being even more involved as a CASA or just volunteering. I got a card from, Arthur here. How can I show up and read to kids? That presence. So I think that's the importance.
Everybody can make a connection, right, Dr. Sandy? Let me ask either Ezequiel or Maddie on those issues of what is that best way that your practice of reaching?
I think two things is, one is prevention, and I totally agree with what you said. We know that at the age of 8 years old, kids are accessing to pornography. So that is a fact. If we don't arrive before, they will arrive to that source. And one of the things that I said yesterday, and is one of the messages that I want to transmit in a survey that we participated, we found out that the educators and parents were the 6th and 7th line of information for kids in terms of sexual education. So our goal is to become the first, not the 6th and the 7th. That is prevention. About intervention, I really believe that we need to show up for them, because the reason why they are victims of sextortion, sexual exploitation, virtual slavery. We talked about NTH room cases in Korea, the Tor network here in America. All that is because somebody didn't show up on time. So, yeah, that is what I think.
Everything that's been said, and adding to that, it's being aware. It's acknowledging that it is happening at younger and younger ages. With access to social media, we ran a survey with our teams in preparation for today. Over 90% of our school staff said yes, social media is an issue. Over 90% said yes, there's cyberbullying, there's people taking people's identities and making fake accounts, sextortation happening on junior high school campuses, and again, as we're noting, it's happening with even younger audiences as well. So prevention, intervention, reintegration back in, right walking with, going back to Dr. Morgan's and Judge Hernandez's example of the crosswalk. Let me walk with you. Let me be a model. We have the model, right? Dr. Kristen Hughes was talking, a wonderful pediatrician, talking about the importance of, well, what are we modeling as adults for those that are watching us? So it's making this into a practice of humanity, of like, even when I'm on the clock or off the clock, how am I showing up for those that are watching and observing around me?
Thank you, Madeline. So I'm going to stick to time because otherwise Dr. Morgan will, give me the card up because I want to leave any time for questions. But this is such an extremely esteemed panel. I'm so privileged to be here on this stage with you. Last thoughts, spidey senses. What do you impart just as a last minute with this group before we turn it over to Dr. Morgan for questions?
I want to go by something Tamika said. We've seen and shown in this country that when you go to schools, talk about teen pregnancy, saw how kids start doing promise rings and so forth, smoking, drinking. I remember up in Glendale, there was this, because the kids like to race, they spin cars. They went in there and they showed them, about kids being wiped out of the cars. Two girls got killed one night because they're out there, and they killed, the cars were spinning, but they got out of control and killed someone. And that slowed it down. We've shown, and it's proven, that intervention in schools, especially for those kids that are marginalized, that may not have, I would have put it, parents that aren't involved, parents that may not be that good, whatever you want to call it, okay? That going into the schools and talking to children, police, activists, whatever, it works, okay? Going to the source with the kids works.
Father Greg from Homeway Industries says we need to create a community of kinship so much that God would recognize it. When we talk about creating community and kinship, it's those compassionate, loving relationships. People at work tease me because I tell everyone that I love them. I don't know all of you in this room, but I love you. I have love for you. That's another thing that my grandmother taught me. Tomorrow's not promised. So love those around you today, like today's your last day. So it's that. It's coming from a place of love and actualizing it together as a village.
Thank you, Madam Ezequiel.
Well, I would say two things. First, the easiest is, I was brightening here because it came to my mouth just now. I think it is better to feel uncomfortable because you talked about it than feel uncomfortable because you didn't. Secondly, don't worry about doing little things. And those little things is affecting your immediate ecosystem. And secondly, I know that in terms of especially legislation, and that is something that we're fighting in Spain, the criminal code doesn't educate. And you can sanction, but sanctions do not educate. We need to invest resources in education because it is the only way to change the status quo. So these is the two things that I would like to leave you with.
Thank you. Ms. Tamika, final thoughts?
Mic drop. No, I mean, that's exactly everything that's been expressed. But when we talk about, it's nice to talk about things, but when we walk out of here, what are we going to do, right? And we've already talked about, showing up personally and individually and all of those things. but I just wanted to share that, particularly with human trafficking, you know, we have our victim, we have the trafficker, but that John is driving the industry. And the John is the one that is only subject to a misdemeanor. If he is, and we know our pedophiles are Johns looking for little girls or boys, but when the officers catch them, we as prosecutors have to prove that they knew that they were underage, right? And that's all from the uphill battle. Trafficker, it's just strict liability. We don't care if you knew or not. You're going to prison and you're getting the sex registry. Johns, it's a misdemeanor. And why is that? I wonder. Because they're driving the industry. So I just want to impart with you, if you want to do something, we tried to change the law in California to get more significant penalties on Johns, and it fell on deaf ears. So if you want to do something, lobby your legislature to change the law with Johns. And there's a lot of support there from law enforcement. If you need someone to come to your schools or your community-based organizations, talk to your kids, to bring it to the source. Talk to Dr. Morgan, she's got my number on speed dial now. I work with all law enforcement. You know, we are here to network and we are here to help you. It shouldn't be an uphill battle. But the action, and then on a personal level, figure out how you can show up and be the love that kids run to. So,
Thank you. So, winding that up then, yeah. Thank you. My special thanks is to Dr. Morgan, who's going to come up here and ask some questions, because we don't do convenings like this unless we have leaders like Dr. Morgan, who does this day in and day out for decades. So, my thanks to you for letting us do this.
Okay, we're going to share this mic to do the Q&A. But you did, oh, she's going to give you hers. I like you, Tamika. We're new friends. You need to give us your final wrap-up before I share the questions from the audience.
Well, my final wrap-up, I've been talking as I've asked the questions. You can see how important it is for us to take care of our kids. And I emphasize, they are our kids. It takes a village to keep them safe. I worry about our kids that don't fit into the programs that are existing. The work that is the spectacular work that's being done. So I guess with my ask is to challenge everyone to think about everything you heard from these panelists. What can you put in play to make a difference to keep our kids safe? Because we all have a responsibility, but I'm going to steal it from Arthur. We all have spidey senses. You all need to use it and put it into action.
All right, so this question I've been asked 2 or 3 times, and now it's finally time to ask it. How do non-parents get involved with working with parents to persuade them, to investigate? There have been different versions of this, but the whole idea that there are people in the community, so much of the prevention is directed at parents. What about, my grandkids are grown, what about non-parents?
I'm not a grandfather yet, but I said it, I believe in the previous workshop, and I think it's important when we talk about keeping our children safe. I agree with Judge Hernandez. I think we talk about community. So we need to think that it's not just our immediate children, but the children in our community. This is a massive issue, and if you care about your neighbor's child or the other children in the school where your child goes, you are taking care of your community. And the same thing that's passed generation to generation. I think that it's important also to make commitments at home, at family. It's good that you can talk as a father with your father, the grandfather of your child, and talk about these issues. This is something transversal. It's not something just that affects you individually with your child. This is something massive. It is our responsibility as citizens, as part of a society, to have to step up and also take care of our children, not just my immediate children.
Okay, what ways can schools implement mental health improvements, which in turn help keep kids less reliant and vulnerable on the internet? I think we have to install spidey sensors everywhere.
Going back to what Ezequiel said, one thing that I think about as far as it's called the path of humanity principles. And the first principle of path of humanity is what you do and what you think about a child who you will never meet is a window into who you are. Okay. As far as services for kids in school, we have all these counselors, we have this and that. I think it's about teachers really understanding, like, we have this thing right now with the police, the police are overwhelmed, they have to be counselors, they have to be police officers, they have to be marriage counselors. Well, it's going to be the same thing with teachers too, okay? It's just, I'm one of those blunt object type people, which, that's just the work, okay? You have to carry many hats. You have to wear many hats now. We live in a society now in which wearing many hats is what you have to do now to keep a society safe.
And I'll add to that, there's a quote here from Rachel Sampson that says, "The capacity of self-soothing is born out of hundreds and hundreds of instances of being soothed by someone else." Our children and youth need adults everywhere. Going back to what we're saying about the importance of community, I can't just be a bystander. These are our kids. This is our community. Together, we have to install neural pathways with consistency together by modeling, mirroring together. So when we talk about mental health on campuses, it's not just the mental health for the youth. It's the mental health for the family. It's the mental health for the administrators. Teachers are burnt out, right? They're still handling concerns from post-pandemic and students being behind on academics. So how are we helping as a community to model a mirror for each other and creating that environment together?
Wow. Okay, I'm just the question asker. How do we create safe spaces online when we know kids will be on the internet anyways? And answering this in the context of we're the community-based panel for our kids, not just the kids of parents that are very actively involved. Creating safe places.
Creating safe places online. That's the $1 million question. I don't and I asked that of Investigator Dent. I just sat in there, and I'm a prosecutor, and he said his sergeant was out on a camping trip with his 10-year-old son, and his son was communicating with a strange man, and this man did for weeks. So we don't have the answers, but so I go back to bringing it to the source, educating the kids how to look for it. Like, the education needs to happen directly with the children. And it's not a scared straight situation, it's just facts. This is how they do it. This is how you should respond. This is when your spidey senses should go up. And someone's saying, hey, what school do you go to? Things like that. Teaching them how to protect themselves. So that when they're online and they find that they're not safe, they run. Right? I don't know that you can create just this absolute safe space online. I don't think it's...
There's too many...
I hate to be a cynic, but
there's too many predators.
Too many predators.
The minute that some of the pages or some of the applications are taken down, there's another one that's popping right back up behind it. Right. So I think we would be very Pollyanna to think we can create just this one safe space online, because the ugliness of those out there will be right behind it, creating something that's not a safe space.
Yeah, and I think that the online world is not safe in itself. We saw yesterday the case of the toll rooms in America. There's more than 200 forums activated today with more than 35 million of videos and images of children exploited sexually only in America. And if we don't, and that is something that is not safe in itself. We have Telegram, and this is a global issue. So even if we do something here, who's going to do something in service from Russia? So in Europe now we have a debate in the European Union, and we accepted the fact that technology goes faster than our capacity to adapt to those changes. So probably it's time to say, until we have the capacity and the tools to manage all these changes, it's better to stop and say children cannot access through devices to this data. Because otherwise we will affect privacy laws and we will need biometrics, and that is not going to happen. So it's better to say we stop this. Online world is not safe for children, and probably that is the safest thing, because as Mr. Tamika said, online and safety is something compatible. Well, I think it's not.
Wow. Yeah, we got a whole panel. Go ahead.
Yeah, I remember what Tamika said, you know, when it comes to prosecuting and stuff like that, you have to be not invasive, because you're trying to get the individuals to open up, whatever, to do all the things that are necessary when it comes to the law. But again, as family and so forth, you gotta be invasive, okay, all right? You gotta be your kid's favorite chat person, you know. Sometimes I went to my friends, my sister and her 30-year-old daughter, you know, they say, who are you texting all the time? What's Whitney? You know, it's her 36-year-old daughter, and then her 9-year-old grandson, whatever. They chat all the time and stuff like that. So you be invasive with your family and stuff like that. You know what's going on with your niece, nephew, daughter, son, godchild, whatever. The more invasive you are, the more buddies you are with them, the easier it might be to figure out how to protect them.
I just love, I should have been ticking off how many times you use the word invasive. It's like normalizing it for us. Okay, so Ezequiel said that sometimes we have to say things that are uncomfortable, and there started to be a little bit of a dialogue on here about pedophiles in your own family, and the response to find a therapist. But I do think this is something it's uncomfortable to talk about. How do we talk about it?
Oh, I'll start that. We have to talk about it, and then I'll turn it over to this panel. We have to be okay being uncomfortable and having challenging, uncomfortable conversations. And the quick answer to it, can a, because I saw the question pop up, can a family member be a pedophile? Absolutely. Sadly, Ms. Tamika and I have seen way too many of those in our sexual assault cases in the court system. So yes, we have to have the uncomfortable conversation.
We have to talk about it. Part of the reason why I'm so passionate about the work that we do is, as a survivor of trauma, we didn't talk about it. There was a taboo. You don't talk about what's going on in the home. You don't share that information out. But we have to encourage families and kids to know that it's okay to talk about things, and that difficult things might result as a incidents, but we'll get through it. And we need enough people within the village and the community to say, we're going to walk with you through it, even though it might be, oh, you know what, someone in my household is doing this thing. Okay, well, you know what, we're going to get through this together. Part of the healing.
Okay, as community members, how do we get involved, Your Honor, in changing public policy regarding harsher punishments for sex purchasers?
Okay, so what I have to be really mindful, because I have a canon of ethics. When I was the juvenile presiding judge, I had a lot more leeway when I was working in CSEC cases. But as a natural or as a neutral magistrate, I have to be very mindful to tell you, I enforce the laws that come before me. If you want to change laws, you have a legislative branch to do so. And it's somebody that has to be lobbied. It has to happen with advocacy. It doesn't happen by just willing it and thinking and hoping that it happens. You have to turn to people who are prosecuting. And so what I do at this point, so that I don't get myself in ethical canon issues, I turn it over to the prosecutor here.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So that's exactly what we did. We, as human traffickers from our Orange County District Attorney's Office, we sat around and said, really? These Johns aren't getting anything? Let's write up a proposal, get it to the Prosecutors Association, you know, things like that. So we have a lobbyist. The Orange County District Attorney's Office has a lobbyist. I mean, we work to change laws to protect our community, public safety. So if you have, you know, starting with your legislature, writing them, reaching out, certainly I can put you in touch with people. We can partner together as a community. But that's what we do. We see what the gap is, and we try to change laws.
So we're going to invite you back for an advocacy day
Oh,
to figure out how
great.
to do that. Last question for this closing plenary. I'm an elementary kid's mom. Is there any way we can teach kids about cyber safety and human trafficking practically in the public education system? I don't have education people on here, but if you were in the first session this morning, you got to see the video, Know More, Do Better. And you can visit the Live to Free table back there, talk to Fullerton School Board member, stand up, Ruthie, and wave your hand. We want to send our students into middle schools to do this kind of work. So, last remark, Judge, about our action steps for our community, for our kids.
Well, as I told you, I think I wrapped that up with use your spidey senses, because
Okay.
we need to move into action collaboratively and not just talk about it to keep our kids safe. Because it's not just enough to have the programs. We have to reach out to those who aren't being heard, that don't have voices. You've heard that for the last 2 days. You can help by starting to be their voice.
Can you thank this wonderful panel?